He's the founding executive director of the Foundation for Climate Restoration. He's an entrepreneur, marketing agent, leader, and strategic consultant with a strong background in technology for growing and supporting organizations that make the world a better place. Ilan.
All right. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? All right. Before I begin, I would like to ask everybody, all the members of the Climate Restoration Circle, to stand up. Yeah. Thank you very much. You've done an excellent job. Thank you very much. So, as you can see from the title over there, we're going to talk about the emerging multi-trillion-dollar climate restoration marketplace. And what I'd like you to walk away from here today is with a certain perspective that you may or may not have already, but that I think is going to be very important for us to succeed in our mission to restore the climate. Let me start with a few background words about the Foundation for Climate Restoration. It was officially established a couple of years ago. The actual work started a few years before that, about 5 or 6 years ago, as the Healthy Climate Alliance. That was an organization founded by Peter and Sharon Fiakovsky. A couple of years ago, they decided that they want to incorporate into an official legal entity. That's when I stepped in. I co-founded the Foundation for Climate Restoration. And been the executive director in building that organization over the last couple of years. Our goal is 300 by 2050, 300 parts per million by the year 2050. 300 parts per million is a safe and healthy concentration level of CO2 in the atmosphere, and we want to accomplish it by 2050. Our vision is restoring a safe and healthy climate like we had 100 years ago. Basically before everything, before the Industrial Revolution and before we put those trillion ton of CO2 in the atmosphere. And the mission of the foundation is to ensure that by 2030, that we will be able to restore the climate by 2050. And so we've been talking about the report from the IPCC and other information that we got from different directions, but I think it's very clear that the next decade, 2021 to 2030, is going to be a very key pivotal, critical moment in the history of mankind. Not just because of the climate, but also because of the Sustainable Development Goals that also scheduled to be implemented by the end of the next decade. And so we've developed this 300 by 2050 climate restoration roadmap. We're at the beginning of that journey. This year and the next year are going to be the year of planning and preparation. The next decade has been defined by the United Nations as the decade of ecosystem restoration. So it's now official. We're going to be restoring our Earth systems over the next decade, and of course the climate is the major system. Our intention, our plan is to reach 100% capacity to restore the climate by 2030. So close to the end of the next decade, we're going to start seeing the trend being reversed. We're going to start seeing concentration of CO2 starting to go down. And by 2050, we're planning, hoping to get to a healthy level of 300 parts per million. In order to do that, fundamentally we have to do two things. We have to restore the Arctic ice, and we have to draw down, we have to remove 1 trillion ton of CO2 from the atmosphere. And so we've defined 3 core programs that can get the job done. One of them is Arctic restoration. If you want, I can talk about the solutions later if there's going to be any questions. In terms of CDR, carbon dioxide removal, we're focused on scalable, financeable, and available now technologies with existing markets. And so we've identified two markets that can absorb that amount of CO2. The first one is synthetic limestone. We're using over 50 gigaton or 54 gigaton of limestone per year globally for our construction industry. And so there are technologies that have already been proven and tested that can take CO2 from the air, basically convert that into synthetic limestone, and then sell that as aggregate for construction. And if we supply all of the demand of the construction industry for limestone from the air rather than from the ground, from quarries, we can actually remove the trillion-ton CO2 within 3 decades, so according to the schedule. Another place that can absorb that amount of CO2 and also be commercially viable is the ocean, and so our third program is fishery restoration. And we've heard from Brian at the beginning, in the morning, at the beginning of the event, about one of the solutions, kelp forest. There are other solutions also that can revive the ocean and sequester large quantities of CO2. So here's a quote from Edgar Bronfman. The video is available on YouTube. This is from the Milken Global Conference, and he says, the CO2 market will reach $1 trillion by 2030 from effectively zero now. So this is one example of somebody that can also already see the future, the near future, understanding that the CO2 removal is a huge, huge business opportunity. Here's another title. I think there's a few people here that are going to be interested in that. This is a 15 trillion opportunity for farmers to fight climate change. I think Indigo is the company that offered that. And here's another example. Felix spoke this morning about the 2020 election, and we're already seeing candidates talking about trillions of dollars of budgets to fight climate change, restore the climate, and so on. This is just in the United States. So the point I'm trying to make, if it's not obvious yet, is that this is a huge, huge, huge opportunity. And what we've been doing with the Foundation for Climate Restoration over the last couple of years is to create the infrastructure, the foundation, literally, for climate restoration, bringing in initially philanthropic money. But we know philanthropic money is not going to be enough. It's just good enough to start the projects, to de-risk them, to prove their viability, but to actually get the job done, we're going to need investment money, initially from private investors and later on from institutional investors like insurance companies, pension funds, and so on and so forth. So this climate restoration marketplace, this multi-trillion-dollar marketplace that pretty much doesn't exist today, but will be a very thriving market within 10 years, what does this market need to be able to do? I don't think that we want to keep it in the hand of the invisible hand to manage that market, because I don't know if we do that, we can actually get the results that we want. So in order to get the results that we want, which is 300 by 2050, a safe and healthy climate by 2050, we need that market to be able to remove 50 gigaton of CO2 from the atmosphere every year. We need to be able to measure our progress and stay on track to our goal, 300 by 2050. We need to be able to provide accurate and complete reports to all stakeholders, not just financial reports, but also impact reports, also carbon reports. And then we also need to look at worst case scenarios or bad case scenarios and really turn these crises and breakdowns and disasters into economic opportunities. If we have challenges, we can turn them into innovation, and we can create solidarity. If we have disasters and breakdown, that creates economic opportunities. I'm sure some of you have seen or felt the fires that were here not that long ago. Every fire like that requires a lot of investment in infrastructure, rebuilding, addressing the people that were displaced, and so on and so forth. And of course, the issue of climate refugees, a very big issue. If we think of climate refugees as potentially mobile workforce, we can start thinking and maybe even planning and preemptively move the resource where they need to go in order to accomplish what we want to accomplish. So this is a very rough illustration of what that marketplace could look like. As you can see, the foundation is what we're working on right now with the Foundation for Climate Restoration. And we've partnered with the United Nations, we've partnered with Earth Day Network, a network of over 50,000 organizations in 190 countries that reach over 1 billion people around the planet. We've partnered with Citizen Climate Lobby, Climate Mobilization, something, forgot the name, and so on and so forth, right? So we're creating this movement, and at the same time, we're creating the core principles that provide the integrity and accountability of this entire market. Because again, we want to move towards a specific goal, specific target, and we want to do that commercially, but also effectively. And so in that market, on top of the foundation, we have these core programs that we've talked about before. The two things that need to happen in order to restore the climate are restoring the Arctic and removing 1 trillion tons of CO2 from the atmosphere. That means 50 gigaton per year over 20 years. That'll get us to 300 by 2050. So that would be the foundation of the market. Within that market, I expect that we're going to see a few major operations. One of them is the synthetic limestone that could potentially deliver CDR capacity of over 25 gigaton per year. Another one is the fishery restoration. Again, we expect at least 25 gigaton per year of carbon dioxide removed from the atmosphere. And then we have the Arctic restoration, which is a slightly different animal. And again, if there are questions, I'm happy to answer, but I'm not going to get into the details right now. In addition to that, we're going to see smaller bubbles, smaller areas in that marketplace. One of them, of course, is regenerative agriculture, which we estimate could provide CDR capacity of about 10 gigaton per year. And then there's going to be smaller and smaller solutions, and then there's going to be service providers, and then there's going to be solution providers, and then there's going to be professional services. And all of these things are going to work together in what we call the climate restoration marketplace. And so what I'd like you to start considering, if you haven't done that so far, is that even though we're working in different companies and different organizations, even though we're in different locations around the world, we're now stepping into what's going to become the climate restoration industry or segment, right? So in the past, somebody could say, I want to work in the financial sector. I want to work in the construction sector. Now people can say, I want to work in the climate restoration sector. Even if you're a graphic designer, or, we have Mark from the Determined here, these are people that are not literally removing CO2 from the carbon, but they're working within the climate restoration marketplace and the climate restoration industry. In order to succeed, we need a new mindset, and we've heard about this before during the day, but I just want to emphasize that. We cannot continue with business as usual. And I know that sometimes when people hear about business as usual, they think about continuing to use fossil fuels. Of course, we have to transition to clean energy. Of course, we have to transition to renewable. But that's not enough. We also need a new mindset. And the new mindset is instead of maximizing profits, we want to maximize the impact. And the impact is either restoring the Arctic, removing the CO2, restoring the soil, restoring the oceans. This is the impact we actually want to see happening on the ground, happening in reality. So we want to maximize the impact while providing reasonable return on investment for the investors. And that's very important, because otherwise this thing is not going to be sustainable. And remember, we can't get the job done with donation, with philanthropic money alone. We need to bring in the investors. But I think that we're getting to the place where we understand that hoping or planning for some kind of a 1000x exit, it might happen. It might even happen within the climate restoration marketplace for those early technologies and so on that will really get the job done. But as a general, as a rule, right, we want to look at it as a 30-year investment where we invest our time, our resources, our energy, our innovation, our money, and we see the job gets done, the climate being restored, and a reasonable return on investment so that we can take the money and do something else with it. Yeah, and that's the last slide. I think it speaks for itself. We're all in this together, and it's all hands on deck. So congratulations to all of us, and yeah, let's get the job done.
Hi, Ilan. Thank you so much. That was one forward right there. So could you name some of the other non-labeled marketplace places, 1 and 5s, the smaller ones? Could you just kind of rattle those off?
I can't off the top of my head, but my guess is that somebody here can. So if you can, raise your hand. Yeah, biochar, we have reforestation, issues like food. Basically, the drawdown solutions, all of them. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of things that can get CO2 out of the sky. Sorry? For example, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, Ilan, thank you. I wanted you to talk a little bit about your vision for climate centers in every neighborhood. You've mentioned a number of 10,000, which sounds like a great ambition. So.
Excellent question. Thank you. So in our exploration on how to take that 300 by 2050 roadmap and bring it down to local implementation, we came up with a design we call the Climate Restoration Network, which is a network of climate restoration centers spread around the world that are working locally to bring solutions from the network, resources, money, investment from the network, and implement them on a local level. All right, so think about it as the climate restoration, Chamber of Commerce or post office or whatever you have in every small city or big city and so on. We believe that there needs to be a climate restoration center in every, city over 20,000 people, where people can go there, get educated, get connected to all the other centers through this network, and deploy the solutions from the network on a local level. And those centers would be customized based on the culture, based on the needs, based on the characteristics of that local region.
I missed the part on fishery restoration. Can you tell me in just a couple sentences, how does that work again?
Yes. Actually, Damien is probably better than that. Better than me. So basically, the idea is the oceans are dying for whatever reason. The water is getting hotter, the acidity level goes up, there are not enough nutrients, and so on and so forth. Once we provide the necessary conditions, in some places it's adding a small amount of iron, in other places it's creating structures like kelp forest, and so on and so forth. Creating life in the ocean, basically carbon is the base, is the building block of life, and so that carbon, that CO2, is sucked from the atmosphere into the ocean. Okay. And that creates life. Basically, it creates the phytoplankton through photosynthesis, and then all the food chain basically is developed from there. We can then sell the fish or the seaweed to pay for that work, but in terms of the actual carbon sequestration, it is estimated that up to 50% of that life basically dies and falls down to the bottom of the ocean, where it stays there for hundreds of years. So that is the aspect of sequestration that we're looking at from the perspective of the foundation. And of course, being able to provide food and jobs and economic development and investment opportunities and so on is an added benefit to that.
Okay, and a gigaton is 1 billion tons, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, got it, thanks.
dig the plan. What's with the synthetic limestone? Just as similar, he asked about what's the process, or is that established, or what's going on?
Yes, it's actually one of the startup companies here in the Silicon Valley. It's a company called Blue Planet. They have a patented process by which they mimic the same kind of process that shellfish use to create their shell. So it's basically CO2 with calcium mixed together through some kind of process, and then being coated on top of rocks and so on and so forth. This has been proven and tested, including, I think it was Terminal 1 in San Francisco Airport. And I personally heard the testimony of the engineer that was working on the project on behalf of San Francisco. They were very happy with the result and recommending to continue to use that. Blue Planet is about to start their commercial plant, the first commercial plant, probably before the end of this year. And once that is in place, we estimate that there's going to be a lot of requests, a lot of demand for that from major cement companies to deploy that around the world.
I have a two-part question, if that's
Part
okay.
one.
So part one, when you indicate the gigatons per year, are you counting carbon dioxide or carbon? Because the thing is, 1 ton of carbon makes 3.7 tons of carbon dioxide. So depending on how you're accounting, you're either counting basically you're counting carbon or carbon dioxide. That's the first question.
But we're talking about CO2.
CO2, okay.
But we're saying a trillion. If it's going to be a 1.5 trillion or a 1.7 trillion, it's by the time we get there, we'll know how much we actually need to pull out.
Yeah.
Right now, what we're saying is a trillion because it's easy to say.
Yeah. And then the other question is Arctic restoration. What exactly does that entail? I wasn't aware that there was any way to restore the Arctic besides just letting nature do it and having the glaciers and ice sheets grow back. Is there some active thing involved?
Absolutely, yes. We're looking at 3 solutions. The first one is ICE 911 that was mentioned here by Sabrina. This is the most advanced solution that we've been working on that for 12 years now. It's basically silica. It's very fine grains of sand-like material, hollow spheres that float on the water, on the slushy ice, basically to increase its reflectivity. Right? So instead of most of the energy from the sun being absorbed by the dark blue ocean, because most of the ice is gone now, that layer of floating sand basically reflects most of the energy back. So this creates a cooling effect. It's called albedo management. The other albedo management technology that we're looking at that is way less developed, it's still in theory and needs to be researched, is called marine cloud brightening, which is spraying salt water into the lower level of clouds to basically thicken and brighten the clouds so that they would also reflect more of the sun. The third technology that is actually been proven, been used by oil companies 20, 30 years ago is called ice thickening. They've used that to thicken the ice so they can drill for oil. Basically, the idea is to pump water from under the ice during the winter where the temperature are below freezing, pump the water from under the ice. In our case, it's going to be using wind turbines. And then spray those water over the ice. Because the temperature is below freezing, that spray is then frozen, basically creating artificial snow in a sense. And then over the winter, we could probably thicken the ice about a meter. So that would then let the ice survive the summer. And that's what we want to do, is we want to thicken the ice and bring back the multi-year ice.
With regards to those solutions, wouldn't if you were to do something like add silica to the water, how would that influence the fish and things like that? Is the silica harmful to the ecology there?
Completely harmless. Yeah. It's basically the same material as sand. It's just manufactured based on specifications, but in terms of the material, completely harmless. There's been a lot of tests that has been done, with animals and so on and so forth, so completely harmless.
Okay. Thanks.
All right, any other questions?
I have one.
Yeah, oh.
Hi. I was wondering, what are the biggest obstacles that you're facing with this climate restoration marketplace, and what would be a multiplier to make it the most successful that it could be in the shortest amount of time? Because, I mean, you do have a timeline there, but I'm just worried about the time limit. So, yeah, what would be like a multiplier?
That's a great question. I think that if we could take all of our lessons that we've learned from doing business, you know, the right way, but also most of the time the wrong way, leveraging all the technologies and the innovation, you know, from the communication platform that we have. You know, we spoke about crowdfunding, equity funding platforms and so on, blockchain and so on. So I think that if we have a suite of solutions and technologies and resources so that we can manage this, not manage the market, but allow for the players in the market to play nice with each other, I think that will make all the difference in the world. And that's why I think the collaborative mindset is imperative. Because if we're going to compete on who's going to generate, you know, the profit inside the climate restoration market, I think we're going to fail. So we do need to be able to play nice with each other and also still have everybody be rewarded for their time and effort and innovation and ideas and intellectual property.
So silicon is heavier than water. How do you keep the silicon from?
Sorry?
The silicon is heavier than water.
Not silicon, silica. And I am not a scientist or an engineer, so I don't know the details, but this thing floats, it's hollow, and you can go to ice911.org and you'll get the information that you need.
Okay, and also there's this issue with global dimming. Are you familiar with that?
Sorry, global?
Global dimming. Global dimming is what happens when you burn dirty coal and diesel. It puts a kind of umbrella on the atmosphere. It blocks solar radiation. So when you clean up dirty coal and diesel and things like that, then the global dimming goes away, and then the atmosphere heats up.
I don't know the details, the technical details, but I know that SRM, solar radiation management, is something that people talk about that. We at the foundation were not involved with that. This feels a little too risky and a little bit too out there. What we're focused on, viable, commercial, scalable solutions that exist right now. So I don't know the answer to that question.
All right, thank you.
I'm wondering if you're saying you don't want the people to be competing against each other. Is there some kind of collaborative structure, maybe sharing profits or something that different companies in this marketplace can do, is the first question. The second question is, if there is trillions of dollars in this field, how come venture capital isn't pumping in tons of money if there's so much?
Okay, so let me go back to this slide right here that's saying that it will reach $1 trillion by 2030 from effectively zero now. So we don't have trillions of dollars yet. What we know is that to get the job done, we would need trillions of dollars. Just thinking about the, I think it's called 45Q, the incentive program that the government is paying for every ton of CO2 sequestered. I think they're paying out at $45 or $30 per ton and so on. Just thinking about that, you have 1 trillion ton of CO2 in the atmosphere. That's basically free raw material that we can take out and do something with, right? And so this is going to be a $1 trillion market, one way or another. The question is, and that's what the plant that the seed that I want to plant today, is that it needs to be a different kind of market. We need to learn from the mistakes or the experience of the past. And when we design this market, design it with that 300 by 2050 in mind. Design it with, we want to scale to 100% climate restoration capacity by 2030. How to do that? That's still the question. And I estimate that we have about a year and a half to figure this out as we prepare for the decade of ecosystem restoration, the world working together to restore the climate. So to answer those questions, that's what we're doing here. That's what we're starting the conversation. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you again.